When I first started writing a book, I thought it was super simple. Like, I knew it was really hard, but I never knew there were so many different stages. I thought writing a book was you write the first draft, then you edit it, then you publish it. And that I could not be more wrong. That misunderstanding has given me a lot of self doubt because I'm thinking like I'm doing this wrong. I'm not talented enough. This is not how it's supposed to be. Hey, I'm Lily. I'm an aspiring author and I'm currently working on my debut fantasy romance novel. Everyone's process for writing a book looks extremely different, but I wanted to show my stages of writing a book from the drafting, brainstorming phase to the publishing phase. And right now, I'm currently somewhere in the later stages. So I want to talk about what I've done so far and the experience I have. And then I'm going to talk about what I plan on doing based on advice I've heard from people and stuff that I've seen in the writing and author world. The first stage that I do is the brainstorming stage. So this is the kind of idea creation stage. For me, I'm definitely more of a natural discovery writer, so that's going to affect my stages and what works for me. When I first have an idea, I think it's really important for me to let it fully develop before I try to push it into a structure. I will think of a concept, I will listen to music, I will look at Pinterest and make Pinterest boards and kind of look at what intuitively is kind of drawing me in. And I see thinking of a story idea less of me creating it and more me discovering it. I will do like mind maps and just write down stuff and kind of let things intuitively come to me. I will sometimes practice writing different scenes and practice writing in different voices and see kind of how the characters are going to interact. I don't like to think too hard about the plot in the beginning because I think that sometimes restricts my creativity. I'll ask lots and lots of what if questions, and I will also talk to people in my life, in my close circle, and talk out different ideas and see what kind of comes up. Now that I have like a pretty strong idea, stage two is the outline and plotting stage. This is where I like to sit down and really look at different story structures. I like to look at the character itself and like really flesh out the main protagonist and the main love interest. So I like to write like fantasy romance. So that's kind of more in my wheelhouse. I will do different arcs. So I will kind of map out the main story points. So like the catalyst, which is like in the very beginning, like the big event that pushes your story into motion. I like to figure out the main arc of the characters and see where I want them in the beginning versus where I want them in the end. And I want to think a lot about the different themes that I want to put into this work. The early stages, I want to make sure that I'm not holding my ideas too strong and too restrictive because I think it's important to let your ideas flow. And if you're writing and you notice that this whole other idea is coming up, I will sometimes let myself go with that. I like to use like Save the Cat Writes a Novel to kind of like have a general beat kind of structure. But again, I don't like to be too restrictive. I'll kind of know when it's ready to start because I get to a point where I can't plan anymore and I just need to start writing and really flesh out all the small details. Stage three, I have draft one. I've heard so many things about the first draft and all this advice and all these things that people should do. I think it's really important with a first draft to let yourself kind of have a lot of freedom and use the general plot and outline that you thought of, but also kind of see how the characters work in the story and let them go on tangents if you feel like it's needed. And kind of play with different character voice, play with the world, play with the story building, different conflict, different tensions, different motivations. In the draft one stage, I like to focus on just getting all the words on the page. So in this stage, I will use lots of writing sprints where I'll put a timer for like 20 to 40 minutes and just write as much as I can. I try not to edit too much in this stage because that can kind of take away from just getting all your words on paper because again, with that being not too restrictive, I end up changing almost everything. So there's no point in me focusing too hard on the details. This is the stage where I'm really just writing and writing and writing. And it's so fun because I feel like there's not a lot of pressure. Like your first draft doesn't have to be good, and it most likely will not. A lot of people talk about how their first draft is really confusing and messy, and it's kind of just the bones of the story. I like to finish the first draft really quickly. So I like to give myself really sharp deadlines and just really fast writing sprints because for me, I have a really short term memory. So I like to get all the words on the page as fast as I can. The first draft is all about just finishing it and getting your story out there. It's not about perfecting it. When you're done with draft one, this is what I do. So after draft one, I take space. So stage four is taking space from your project and your world. I think it's really important to take space. People need to take different levels of space. For me, as someone who has a really short term memory, even just like 2 weeks to a month is like enough space for me because I forget everything. Like when I'm reading it, I'm like, oh, this is like a whole different story. I think just give yourself enough time to take your headspace out of your story and think about something else because you want to go back to it with fresh eyes and seeing it as like a reader would or an editor. Because when you're too close to your story, it's hard to see what's not working. During this space, I like to read a lot. I like to focus on other writing projects or just take space from writing in general and just do other things and experience life. When you go back to your draft, you're going to be so ready for it. Stage 5 is the read through. The first time I read through it, I don't like to take any notes or change anything. I'd like to read it like I'm reading a book. So I'll put it in like a different format, whether it's like PDF or a lot of times I'll print it out because just seeing it in a different medium will help me kind of see my story in a different light. And I like to read through it just like completely as a reader. I don't even like to mark it up. Then I will do a second read through, and this time I will go through and do a lot of edits. I will do line comments. I will make whole bullet points of all these things I want to change. And I like to comment like I'm a reader. Like I'll like ask a lot of questions. I'll be like, why would they do that? Or what is this? Or expand here. Something about writing is you can't be scared to edit too much. I think the best writers are those that are the best editors because you really have to dive in and change everything and not be afraid of getting rid of things that you love in your story, which is so sad. But if there's a beautiful scene that you love that just is not fitting with the story, maybe you can change it and put it in a different story, or you can rework it. But I think seeing your story objectively and being able to just like rip it apart and pull it back together is like so important. If you see that you have to like rewrite like the entire book, and I will talk about that later because I had to do that multiple times, that doesn't mean you're a bad writer. It means that the story needs more time and it needs to be developed more. And it also shows, if anything, that you've improved so much in your craft that you don't even enjoy the original story, that you can see so much more potential. So don't shy away from editing. See it as an opportunity to make your story better. Every writer changes their story massively. So it has nothing to do with your own talent. It's kind of just the process of writing a book. Stage 6 is the replot and restructure. So because I'm more of a discovery writer, the first draft is usually a lot of new stuff has happened from the original outline that I had. So I kind of am looking at the whole picture. So this is the time where I do main developmental editing. So this is like the story, the structure, the arcs, the world building, the plot holes, everything. And I want to make sure that it fits the vision that I see for the story. I like to really focus on all the arcs of each character and making sure that they all kind of blend well with the story. For me, the planning is always something that is really overwhelming, but it's so helpful. In this stage, I like to do more detailed planning. So I'll look at story structures like Save the Cat Writes a Novel, and I'll actually plot out the different beats of the story, and I'll do like the opening image and the theme statement and the catalyst and the fun and games and the midpoint twist and so on. And I will actually plot out each point in the story. I will plan out the different chapters and I will do different summaries. And each stage, like the further I go into the book, the more detailed my planning is. In the beginning, I'm really like open to new ideas and open to the creative process. But I think once you get further into the story, you know the story so well that if you have this idea that derails the whole plot, you're like, but that's not the plot. Like I know the plot now. Like I know this is the story. And that's great. Like when I get to this point, it's really satisfying because I know that like I'm really starting to see that the real story come to life. And this is the closer to the finished product that was in my head. A lot of times in the structuring time, I will go through and I use Scrivener. So I have like different folders. I'll make different summaries for each chapter. And then I will talk about kind of like the main plot points that happen in that chapter. And I will match it up to the different beats that need to happen in the story. And this is really great because then when I go in for my rewrite, I have a full like plan that I can follow. Stage 7 is the rewrite / draft 2. Normally, I have to rewrite the entire thing because I end up changing my story drastically between drafts. And I think for me, it's easier to just rewrite it than go in and change every detail because it's just so vast. Again, you might have way more of your story in the first draft than I do, so you don't have to rewrite the entire thing. But for me, this is something that I do. And instead of fearing away from it, I see it as just part of the process, because I really feel like the more I write, the more I discover the story. So the more rewrites I do, the closer it gets every time. So yes, it's time consuming, but I think it's totally worth it. Once I have a basic structure for the second draft, then I go through and I start writing the second draft. I let myself write. I don't use as many time sprints and deadlines because I think I want to make sure it's more good in quality, but I still like to give myself deadlines because it helps me stay on track more. And this time I try to stay as close as I can to the outline. I do still make changes and I will go through, and I'm not afraid to stop and edit while I'm writing, because especially now that I'm on the second draft, I have more of the bones of the story. So if I'm writing in a direction that I see is changing the future plot, I will go into those chapters and change those summaries, because this is more of like an editing and writing at the same time. And then once I'm done with draft 2, this is where I feel like I'm a lot further into the story. Stage 8, I will edit and polish draft 2. So I will go through and I will do similar things that I do to draft 1, but I will go through and I'll edit it more and really polish it up. And this time I focus more on line level edits, because at this stage I want to get feedback. So I will go into it and it doesn't have to be perfect, but I will make sure it's readable and it genuinely makes sense. The plot kind of makes sense and is cohesive and feels like a real story. Stage 9 is when I get feedback. So this is the stage that I'm in right now. So up to this point, I can talk about my own personal experience. I have my draft now with alpha readers, and these are people that are seeing more of a rough draft of your work, and they're usually people that are closer to you and you're more comfortable seeing like a less polished version. The book that I'm working right now is actually on draft 3 because I had to rewrite my book twice. But looking back now, if I were to redo that process, I would only have to rewrite it once because now I know more. But again, that was through trial and error. Like now, the next book I do, I'm going to follow these stages. But this is what I've learned through doing the process myself. So I'm editing it as I go, and then I'm sending chapters off one by one to people that I trust, and they're giving me feedback. And it's this first time that I can really get feedback from people. I was really careful about when I chose to get feedback, because if I get feedback too early, I feel like my story hasn't fleshed out enough for it to be at a point where I want feedback. But if I wait too late, then I have everything so perfectly like tied together that I'm so scared to change things. So I think right now is a good time for me to get feedback. Now from here on, this is my plan based on what I've seen other people do. Once I get all the feedback from alpha readers, I'm going to implement those edits and then do another round of self-edits. So I think this is stage 10, implementing feedback and doing another round of self-edits. A full round of edits, I've gotten feedback. Stage 11, I am doing beta readers, and this is when I'm going to seek out people that are readers in my genre and people that are going to actually see this for like more of a polished version. I'm going to send out my draft and I'm going to get more unbiased feedback. Stage 12 is when I am going to hire a professional editor. I'm almost positive that I'm going to self-publish this book because I just think that aligns more with like my journey. I'm going to do a professional editor for developmental edits, copy edits, line level edits, proofreading, all the stuff. After I do professional edits, I am going to look into cover design and formatting and all those things. And this is the stage for like indie self-published authors. But if you're going traditional, after you do beta readers, I would just start querying, because a lot of people talk about how in traditional publishing you don't have to pay for professional editors. That's kind of the stages that I've looked into and what my experience has been so far. I hope this was helpful, because as a new writer going into this, I was so confused. I had no idea what any of this was, and it felt really daunting. And I think hearing other people, it sounds like so many stages. It really does. But I think when you start seeing your book come together, it makes a lot of sense. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this. If myself a year ago found this video, it would be so, so helpful. So hopefully it helps you in your journey. And yeah, thanks for watching and happy writing.